My girlfriend told me, I need to be honest. Your brother is the one I actually want. I replied, he's yours. 1 year later, I was CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. What my ex did when she found out I was engaged to her former boss still cracks me up. We were sitting in our favorite Italian restaurant when Melissa dropped the bomb. The one on 4th Street with the red checkered tablecloths and the candles and wine bottles. We'd been there maybe 30 times over the 3 years we'd dated. I was cutting into my chicken parmesan, actually thinking about how I might propose to her in a few months, when she set down her fork and said, I need to be honest with you about something. I've developed feelings for someone else. I looked up, my stomach already dropping because that tone meant nothing good. I said, okay. Who? She took a breath and said, it's Dominic. Your brother. I actually laughed. Not a real laugh, but that shocked bark of sound you make when your brain can't process what it just heard. I said, you're joking. She shook her head, tears starting to form in her eyes. She said, I'm not. I've tried to fight it, but I can't anymore. When we're all together, when he comes over for Sunday dinners, when we do family things, I feel more connected to him than I do to you. I think I've been falling in love with him for months. I set my fork down carefully. The restaurant noise around us continued like the world wasn't ending. People laughing, wine being poured, the kitchen staff calling orders. I said, does he know? Does Dominic know you feel this way? Melissa wiped her eyes with her napkin. She said, we've talked about it. We didn't mean for it to happen. We feel terrible. But yes, he feels the same way. Something inside me went completely cold and calm. The kind of calm that settles over you when something so catastrophic happens that your emotions just shut down to protect you. I said, how long? She said, what? I said, how long have you two been talking about this? About your feelings for each other? She looked down at her plate. She said, a couple of months. We haven't done anything physical, I swear. We've just been honest with each other about the connection we feel. I took a sip of water. My hand was steady. I said, so my brother, the person I've been closest to my entire life, has been having emotional conversations with my girlfriend about leaving me for him. And you've both been doing this behind my back for 2 months. She started crying harder. She said, we didn't want to hurt you. We tried to ignore it, but it's real and we can't pretend it's not. I stood up. I pulled out my wallet and put 3 20s on the table, more than enough to cover our meal. I said, then don't pretend. You want him? He's yours. I walked out of the restaurant and drove home in that same cold calm. I'd been working as a project manager at a mid-sized marketing firm called Brandwell Solutions for 5 years when my world imploded. The job was fine, stable, paid decently at around $85,000 a year. Nothing spectacular, but enough to live comfortably. I'd started dating Melissa 3 years earlier after meeting her at a friend's barbecue. She worked as a sales coordinator at a boutique consulting firm called Apex Strategy Group. She was beautiful, funny, ambitious. Or at least I'd thought she was those things. Now I was questioning everything I'd thought I knew about her. Dominic was 2 years younger than me, 28 to my 30. He worked in finance at an investment firm, made slightly more money than I did, drove a nicer car. We'd always been close growing up, best friends as much as brothers. Our parents had raised us to look out for each other, to prioritize family. I'd helped him through his divorce 2 years ago when his wife left him for someone else. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd been there for him while he cried and raged and rebuilt his life. And now he was stealing my girlfriend. When I got home, Melissa was already there. She'd driven separately. She was packing a bag in our bedroom, tears streaming down her face. She said, I'm going to stay with my sister for a few days. Give us both time to process this. I stood in the doorway watching her. I said, are you going to see him? Dominic? She paused, a sweater in her hands. She said, eventually. We want to do this the right way. We're not going to rush into anything while you're still hurting. I felt something crack inside the calm. I said, the right way would have been you breaking up with me before developing feelings for my brother. The right way would have been him coming to me man to man instead of sneaking around behind my back. Don't talk to me about doing things the right way. She zipped her bag and turned to me. She said, I know you're angry. You have every right to be. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But I can't help how I feel. I said, get out. She left. I sat on the couch in the quiet apartment and stared at the wall. Then I called Dominic. He answered on the 3rd ring. He said, hey, I was going to call you. I know Melissa told you. I'm sorry, man. I didn't plan for this. I said very calmly, I don't want to hear your excuses. You're my brother. You could have walked away. You could have shut it down. Instead, you chose to betray me. So here's how this is going to go. You and Melissa can be together. I'm not going to fight for her. But you and I are done. We're not brothers anymore. Don't call me. Don't come to my place. Don't try to explain or apologize. As far as I'm concerned, you don't exist. He said, come on, don't be like that. We can work through this. Families get through hard times. I hung up. The next few weeks were a blur. I moved out of the apartment Melissa and I had shared, finding a smaller place across town. I blocked both her and Dominic on everything. Phone, social media, email, complete radio silence. My parents called, devastated, my mother crying, asking how this could have happened, begging me to talk to Dominic and work it out. I told her I loved her, but I wasn't interested in reconciliation. What he'd done was unforgivable. My father was quieter, but I could hear the disappointment in his voice. Not in Dominic, but in the situation, in the fracturing of our family. I felt bad for them, but not bad enough to forgive the betrayal. Friends reached out, split between those who thought I should try to salvage the relationship with my brother and those who agreed he'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I stopped going to our usual hangout spots because too many of them were shared friend groups who were now awkwardly trying to maintain relationships with both of us. Work became my refuge. I threw myself into projects, staying late, volunteering for extra assignments. My boss, a woman named Jennifer Carlisle, who'd been with Brandwell for 15 years, noticed. She called me into her office about 6 weeks after the breakup. She said, "You've been working like a man possessed. Everything okay?" I told her I was going through a personal situation and work was helping me cope. She nodded and said, "Well, whatever you're going through, the quality of your work hasn't suffered. Actually, it's improved. You've closed 3 major accounts in the past month. Keep it up." That conversation planted a seed. If I could channel this anger and pain into productivity, if I could use this energy constructively instead of letting it destroy me, maybe something good could come from this nightmare. I started taking online courses in business strategy and digital marketing. I reached out to contacts I'd made over the years, networking more aggressively. I read books about entrepreneurship and studied successful startup models. The idea started small. I noticed gaps in the market where Brandwell and other agencies weren't serving clients well. Mid-sized businesses that needed sophisticated marketing strategies but couldn't afford the big agency prices. There was a sweet spot there, a niche that wasn't being properly filled. I started sketching out a business plan. 3 months after Melissa's confession, I heard through mutual friends that she and Dominic were officially together. Living together, actually, in an apartment downtown. The news should have hurt more than it did. Instead, it just confirmed what I already knew. They'd made their choice. I'd make mine. I quit my job at Brandwell 4 months after the breakup. Jennifer tried to convince me to stay, offered me a raise and a promotion. I told her I appreciated everything, but I needed to do something on my own. She said, "You're starting a company, aren't you?" I said, "Yes." She smiled and said, "Good. You're ready. If you ever need advice or references, call me." I used my savings, about $38,000, to start my company. I called it Catalyst Digital Solutions. The concept was streamlined marketing services for mid-market companies with a focus on digital transformation and measurable ROI. I worked out of my apartment initially, just me and a laptop. I reached out to every contact I'd ever made, pitched my services, underpromised and overdelivered. My first client was a manufacturing company that needed help with their online presence. I charged them $12,000 for a project that I knew the big agencies would have quoted at $40,000. I worked 18-hour days for 2 weeks and gave them something that exceeded their expectations. They referred me to 2 other companies. Those companies hired me and referred me to others. Within 6 months, I had steady revenue and hired my first employee, a young designer named Kyle Porter, fresh out of college, who was talented and hungry. Within 8 months, I'd hired 3 more people and moved into actual office space, a small suite in a business park. The work was brutal. I was doing sales, strategy, client management, financial oversight, everything. But I loved it. Every success felt like proof that I didn't need Melissa or Dominic or anyone else. I was building something real on my own. By the 10-month mark, I'd landed a major client, a regional restaurant chain called Harvest Kitchen that wanted to expand their digital ordering platform. The contract was worth $220,000. It was the kind of deal that could take my company to the next level, or sink us if we failed to deliver. I hired a consultant to help with the project, someone with specific expertise in restaurant tech integrations. Her name was Victoria Ashton. She'd been a senior executive at Apex Strategy Group, the same consulting firm where Melissa worked, before leaving to start her own consulting practice. She was 42, brilliant, with 20 years of experience in business strategy. We met at a coffee shop to discuss the Harvest Kitchen project. She was direct and professional, laying out exactly what the project would require and what her fee structure would be. I hired her immediately. Over the next 2 months, Victoria and I worked closely on the Harvest Kitchen implementation. She was demanding but fair, pushing me and my team to deliver higher quality work than we'd ever done. The project was a massive success. Harvest Kitchen was thrilled, gave us a glowing testimonial, and referred us to 3 other companies in their network. Victoria and I became friends through the process. She was divorced, no kids, completely focused on her work. We'd grab dinner after long strategy sessions and talk about business, about the industry, about our goals. There was nothing romantic initially, just mutual respect between 2 professionals who understood each other's drive. Then one evening, about 11 months after Melissa had ended our relationship, Victoria and I were working late in my office finalizing a pitch for a potential new client. It was past midnight. We were both exhausted. She looked up from her laptop and said, "Can I ask you something personal?" I said, "Sure." She said, "You work like someone running from something. I've seen that kind of intensity before, usually in people dealing with pain. What are you running from?" I hadn't talked about Melissa and Dominic in months. I'd buried it under work and momentum. But something about Victoria's directness made me tell her the whole story. the restaurant confession, the brother betrayal, the decision to cut them both off and channel everything into building something better. When I finished, Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's the most productive use of heartbreak I've ever heard. Most people would have fallen apart. You built a company." I shrugged and said, "I didn't have a choice. It was either fall apart or do something that proved I was worth more than how they treated me." She smiled and said, "Well, you've certainly proven that. Your company is going to hit $1 million in revenue this year. You've done in less than 12 months what takes most startups 3 years. You should be proud." Something shifted in that moment. The way she looked at me changed, or maybe the way I looked at her changed. The professional boundary that had existed between us felt suddenly thinner. She said, "We should celebrate. When you close the Hamilton deal next week, I'm taking you to dinner. Somewhere nice." I said, "Is that professional or personal?" She said, "Does it matter? If you are enjoying this story already, please subscribe to see more stories like this." We started dating slowly, carefully. Victoria was cautious about relationships after her divorce. I was still gun-shy about trusting someone, but it worked. We understood each other's ambitions, supported each other's goals. There was no game playing, no hidden agendas, just two people who respected each other building something together. 3 months into our relationship, I got a call from my mother. She said, "I need to tell you something before you hear it from someone else. Dominic and Melissa got engaged. They're getting married next spring." I felt nothing. Or maybe I felt relief that they were committed to each other and I could fully close that chapter. I said, "Good for them. I hope they're happy." My mother was quiet. Then she said, "You really mean that, don't you? You've moved on." I said, "Completely. I'm seeing someone, actually. Someone incredible. I'm happy, Mom." She started crying. She said, "I'm so glad. I've been so worried about you. Can we meet her? Can we have dinner?" I told her I'd think about it. I wasn't ready to bring Victoria into family situations that might involve Dominic. Victoria and I kept building our relationship and our professional partnership. She joined Catalyst Digital as Chief Strategy Officer 6 months into our relationship. It made sense professionally and personally. Together, we were unstoppable. The company exploded. We landed 3 contracts with Fortune 500 companies. Revenue tripled. We hired 20 more employees and moved into a larger office space with actual conference rooms and a break room and everything. 14 months after Melissa had ended our relationship, I was sitting in a board meeting presenting our year-end financials. Revenue for the year was projected to hit $3.2 million. We had 40 employees. We were being courted by venture capital firms interested in funding our expansion. I was 31 years old and the CEO of a rapidly growing company. After the meeting, Victoria and I went to dinner to celebrate. We went to an upscale steakhouse downtown, the kind of place I couldn't have afforded when I was with Melissa. Over dessert, Victoria said, "I have something to tell you. I'm being recruited for a board position at Apex Strategy Group, my old firm. They want me to come back as a senior partner and join their executive board." I felt my stomach drop. I said, "Are you going to take it?" She reached across the table and took my hand. She said, "No, I'm not interested in going backward. I'm interested in moving forward with you, with Catalyst, with us. Unless you don't want that." I said, "I want that, more than anything." She smiled and said, "Good, because I'm all in, professionally and personally." That night, I bought an engagement ring. It took me 2 weeks to plan the proposal. I wanted it to be perfect, meaningful, nothing generic. I took Victoria to the coffee shop where we'd first met to discuss the Harvest Kitchen project. The owner was a friend by now and let me reserve the whole place for an evening. I set up candles and photos from our relationship, our professional wins and personal moments. When Victoria arrived, she looked around in surprise and said, "What is all this?" I got down on one knee. I said, "This is where everything changed for me, where I met someone who saw me not as broken or betrayed, but as someone capable of building something extraordinary. You've been my partner in every way that matters. I want you to be my wife." She said yes, before I even got the ring out of the box. We were engaged. The news spread through our professional network quickly. Congratulations poured in from clients, employees, industry contacts. And then, 3 days after our engagement, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. It said, "Congratulations on your engagement. This is Melissa. I heard the news. I'm happy for you." I stared at the message. How had she heard? How did she get my new number? I didn't respond. Another message came through. It said, "I also heard you're the CEO of a successful company now. That's amazing. You always had potential." Still didn't respond. A third message, "I know I don't have the right to reach out, but I wanted to say I'm proud of you. You've done really well for yourself." I blocked the number. That evening, Victoria noticed I was distracted. She said, "What's wrong?" I showed her the messages before I'd blocked the number. She read them and laughed. She said, "Let me guess. She found out you're successful and engaged to someone she knows. Now she's having regrets." I said, "You think she knows I'm engaged to you specifically?" Victoria pulled out her phone and showed me a LinkedIn post from Apex Strategy Group announcing her departure and new role as CSO of Catalyst Digital. The comments section was full of congratulations and several people mentioning our engagement. She said, Apex is where Melissa works. I guarantee she saw this post. The realization hit me. Melissa had left Apex months before Victoria joined as an executive, but she'd still have connections there. She would have seen the announcement about Victoria's new role. She would have put together that her ex-boyfriend was now the CEO of a thriving company and engaged to someone she'd probably known professionally. Someone senior to her, more successful, more accomplished. The symmetry was almost too perfect. I said, "Do you think she'll try to contact me again?" Victoria shrugged. She said, "Probably. People like her don't handle being replaced well, especially when the replacement is an upgrade. Just keep blocking her and don't engage. She made her choice. You've made yours." 2 weeks later, I got an email at my work address from Melissa. The subject line said, "Please read this." I almost deleted it, but curiosity won. The email was long and rambling. She wrote about how she'd made a terrible mistake, how her relationship with Dominic had fallen apart after a year because they'd realized they'd built it on betrayal and guilt. They'd broken off their engagement, she wrote. She was miserable and realized too late that what she'd had with me was real and what she'd thought she had with Dominic was fantasy. She wrote, "I know I don't deserve forgiveness or another chance, but I had to tell you. I see now what I threw away. You were the right person all along and I was too stupid to see it." I deleted the email. Then I forwarded it to Victoria with a note. "Thought you might find this entertaining?" She called me immediately, laughing. She said, "Oh my God, this is pathetic. She actually thinks you'd take her back?" I said, "I think she's just processing regret and shame. I don't take it seriously." Victoria said, "Good, because you're way past her now. You're in a completely different league." The wedding planning started in earnest. We set a date for 8 months out, spring of the following year. Victoria wanted something elegant but not ostentatious. We rented out a vineyard about 2 hours from the city, invited 150 guests, hired the best caterers and photographers we could find. My parents were thrilled. They'd met Victoria by now and loved her. My mother had actually apologized to me for pushing me to reconcile with Dominic early on. She said she understood now that what he'd done was unforgivable, and she respected my decision to cut him off. My father said Victoria was the kind of woman who made you better just by being around her. He was right. Work continued to grow. We landed a contract with a national retail chain worth $1.2 million. We hired a full executive team, including a CFO named Alan Wright, with 15 years of experience in corporate finance, and a CMO named Rachel Delgado, who'd worked for Fortune 100 companies. We were a real organization now, not just a startup. I was in a board meeting presenting our 5-year growth plan when my assistant interrupted. She said, "I'm sorry to disturb you, but there's someone here to see you. She says it's urgent." I excused myself and went to the lobby. Melissa was standing there. She looked different, thinner, tired, her hair shorter than when we'd dated. She said, "Hi. I know I shouldn't be here, but I needed to talk to you in person." My assistant was watching with concern. I said, "This isn't a good time." Melissa's eyes filled with tears. She said, "Please, just 5 minutes. I don't have anyone else to talk to." Against my better judgment, I led her to a small conference room. I left the door open. I said, "What do you want, Melissa?" She sat down and started crying. She said, "Everything fell apart. Dominic and I broke up. I lost my job at Apex because of performance issues. I'm barely making rent. I've been so depressed I can barely function. And then I saw that you're successful and happy and engaged to Victoria Ashton of all people. And I realized I destroyed the best thing I ever had. I stood there trying to feel something. Sympathy, anger, satisfaction, anything. But I just felt distant. I said, "I'm sorry you're struggling, but I don't know what you expect me to do about it." She looked up at me. She said, "I thought maybe we could talk. Maybe get coffee and catch up. Maybe there's a chance we could, I don't know, reconnect." I felt something then. Not anger, but amazement at the audacity. I said, "Melissa, I'm engaged. To someone I love deeply. Someone who didn't betray me with my own brother. You made your choice 18 months ago. I've moved on completely." She said, "But don't you think about what we had? Don't you miss it at all?" I said, "No. Honestly, I don't. What we had was before I knew who I could become. Victoria helped me realize my potential. You leaving was the best thing that ever happened to me because it forced me to build a life I actually wanted instead of settling for one that was just okay." Melissa flinched like I'd slapped her. She said, "So that's it? You won't even consider I cut her off?" I said, "There's nothing to consider. I'm happy. You made sure our relationship ended when you developed feelings for Dominic. What happened after that is on you. I'm not your safety net or your backup plan. You need to figure out your life without me in it." She stood up, anger replacing the tears. She said, "You've changed. You used to be kind. You used to care about people." I said, "I still do, just not people who betrayed me." She left. I went back to my board meeting. That evening I told Victoria about Melissa's visit. She listened and then said, "How do you feel?" I said, "Fine," completely unbothered. "She's a stranger to me now." Victoria smiled. She said, "That's growth. That's you knowing your worth. I'm proud of you." The months rolled on toward our wedding. We finalized details, sent invitations, coordinated with vendors. My parents were involved and excited. Dominic wasn't invited, obviously. My mother had called him and explained that he wouldn't be welcome at the wedding. He'd apparently accepted it quietly. 3 months before the wedding, I got a call from a venture capital firm called Summit Ventures. The partner, a guy named Gregory Kane with 22 years in venture capital, wanted to meet about potential investment in Catalyst Digital. I met him at his office downtown. He said, "I've been watching your company's growth. What you've built in 2 years is remarkable. We'd like to offer you a Series A funding round of $8 million in exchange for 25% equity." I called Victoria from my car. She said, "Take the meeting with our CFO and legal counsel. Don't commit to anything yet, but that's a serious offer." We spent 2 weeks negotiating. The final deal was $8 million for 20% equity, with me retaining majority control and staying on as CEO. The funding would let us expand nationally, hire more aggressively, and pursue larger contracts. It was a game-changing moment. We signed the deal 5 weeks before our wedding. The news made industry publications. CEO of Catalyst Digital Solutions closes $8 million funding round. My phone blew up with congratulations. And then, predictably, Melissa reached out again. This time through Instagram, which I hadn't thought to block. She said, "I saw the news about your funding. That's incredible. You're living the life you always talked about. I'm so happy for you." I finally blocked her on Instagram too. I told Victoria about it. She said, "She's obsessed. It's honestly kind of sad." I said, "I just want her to move on and leave me alone." Victoria said, "She will eventually, once she realizes you're actually happy and not coming back." The wedding day arrived. It was perfect. 70 degrees and sunny at the vineyard, everything we'd planned coming together flawlessly. My parents were there, beaming. Victoria's family had flown in from across the country. Our employees and business partners filled the seats. Standing at the altar watching Victoria walk down the aisle, I felt overwhelming gratitude. Not for the success or the money or the company, but for the bullet I'd dodged with Melissa and the incredible woman I'd found in Victoria. The ceremony was beautiful. The reception was even better. During dinner, my CFO Alan stood to give a toast. He said, "I've worked with a lot of CEOs in my career. Most of them are either brilliant jerks or nice guys who can't execute. The rare ones are both brilliant and good people. That's who we have in our CEO. He built this company from nothing through sheer determination and vision. And he found a partner in Victoria who makes him even better." To the happy couple. Everyone cheered. Later in the evening, Victoria and I were dancing when my phone buzzed. I ignored it. It buzzed again and again. After the third time, Victoria said, "You should check that. It might be important." I pulled out my phone. 3 texts from my mother. The first said, "I'm so sorry to tell you this on your wedding day." The second said, "Melissa showed up at the venue. Security stopped her at the gate." The third said, "She's asking to speak to you. She's very upset." I showed Victoria. She read the messages and started laughing. She said, "Oh my God, she actually crashed our wedding?" I said, "Apparently tried to. Should I go deal with this?" Victoria shook her head. She said, "Absolutely not. Let security handle it. Don't let her ruin this day." I texted my mother back, "Please tell security to ask her to leave. If she refuses, they can call the police. I'm not leaving my own wedding reception to deal with her drama." My mother responded, "Already done. She's leaving. I'm so sorry she tried this." I put my phone away and focused on my wife. My incredible, brilliant, beautiful wife, who'd helped me build a life beyond anything I'd imagined when Melissa had ended our relationship 18 months ago. The reception continued without further drama. We danced, we celebrated, we soaked in the joy of the moment. Later that night in our hotel suite, Victoria said, "Can I tell you something? When I first met you for the Harvest Kitchen project, I thought you were impressive but sad, like someone carrying a weight they wouldn't talk about. Now you're free of it. You're the person you were meant to be." I kissed her and said, "That's because of you. You saw potential in me I didn't see in myself." She smiled. She said, "No, you did the work. I just cheered you on." The honeymoon was 2 weeks in Italy. We turned off our phones, ignored email, and just existed together in one of the most beautiful places in the world. When we got back, tanned and relaxed and ready to dive back into work, there was a stack of messages waiting. Most were congratulations and well wishes, but there was one email that stood out. It was from Dominic. The subject line said, "I owe you an apology." I debated deleting it unread, but decided to see what he had to say. The email was long. He wrote about how ashamed he was of what he'd done, how his relationship with Melissa had imploded under the weight of their guilt and betrayal. He wrote that he'd been in therapy working on himself and understanding the patterns that led him to make such a devastating choice. He wrote, "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just want you to know that I understand now what I destroyed. Not just my relationship with you, but my own integrity. You've gone on to do incredible things, and I'm genuinely proud of you even though I have no right to be." I showed the email to Victoria. She read it and said, "What do you want to do? If this story keeps your interest, please subscribe to get more stories like this." I thought about it. Part of me wanted to respond with anger or vindication, Part of me wanted to ignore it entirely. But mostly, I felt tired of carrying any emotion about the situation at all. I wrote back a single line. I appreciate the apology. I wish you well. I sent it and then archived the entire thread. Victoria said, "That's it? You're not going to say more?" I said, "What else is there to say? He betrayed me. I cut him off. I built something better. His apology doesn't change what happened, but I'm not interested in punishing him forever. I'm just done with the whole thing." She nodded. She said, "That's very mature of you," I said. "Or maybe I'm just happy enough now that I don't need revenge." Work ramped back up. The Series A funding let us expand into 3 new markets. We opened offices in Chicago, Austin, and Denver. Revenue projections for the year were approaching $9 million. We were hiring aggressively, chasing contracts with major corporations, positioning ourselves as a serious player in the digital marketing space. 6 months after the wedding, I got a call from Gregory Kane at Summit Ventures. He said, "I wanted to give you a heads up. We're hearing rumors that MarketForce Digital is interested in acquiring companies in your space. They've approached a few of your competitors. You might want to think about whether that's something you'd be open to." MarketForce was a massive marketing conglomeration, publicly traded, worth billions. Being acquired by them would mean a huge payout, but also losing independence. I told Gregory I'd think about it and discuss with my team. Victoria and I talked about it that night over dinner. She said, "What do you want?" "Not what's smart financially, but what do you actually want?" I said, "I want to keep building. I'm not ready to cash out and lose control." She said, "Then don't. Tell them you're not interested. We can build this into something just as big on our own." I called Gregory the next day and told him we weren't interested in acquisition discussions. He said, "Fair enough. Just know the offer is probably going to be significant when it comes. Keep an open mind." 3 weeks later, MarketForce's CEO reached out directly. His name was Richard Langley, a legend in the industry with 40 years of experience. He wanted to meet in person. I agreed out of professional courtesy. Richard flew into town and we met at my office. He was in his 60s, silver-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my first car. He said, "I've been watching Catalyst Digital for months. What you've built is exactly what we need to strengthen our mid-market offerings. I'd like to make you an offer. $35 million for full acquisition of your company. You'd stay on as a division president, keep your team intact, but have access to all of our resources and client base." I told him I'd need to discuss it with my board and my co-founder. He said he understood and gave me 2 weeks to consider. That night, Victoria and I sat on our back patio with wine and did the math. I owned 65% of the company after the Series A funding. $35 million meant I'd personally walk away with roughly $23 million before taxes. Victoria owned 15% as CSO, giving her about $5 million. Our employees and other stakeholders would split the rest. Life-changing money, generational wealth, the ability to do anything we wanted, but also the end of what we'd built together, the loss of independence and control. Victoria said, "If we take this, what happens next? Do we stay and work for MarketForce? Do we retire? Start something new?" I said, "I don't know. Part of me wants to see how big we can build this on our own. Part of me thinks $23 million is too much to turn down." She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "I'll support whatever you decide. But I will say this. We didn't build this company for money. We built it because we had something to prove, and we love the work. If you take the acquisition, make sure you're doing it for the right reasons, not because someone offered a big number." Over the next week, I talked to our CFO, our legal counsel, several trusted mentors. Everyone had a different opinion. Some said, "Take the money and run." Others said, "Keep building because we had momentum and potential to be worth much more in a few years." I called my father, who'd been a small business owner his whole life. He said, "Son, I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you that money doesn't buy happiness. Meaningful work does. If you're happy building Catalyst, keep building. If you're ready for something new, take the offer. Just make sure you can live with whatever choice you make." I made my decision. I called Richard Langley and told him we were declining the acquisition offer, but appreciated the interest. He was surprised. He said, "That's a lot of money to turn down at your age." I said, "I know, but I'm not done building yet. Ask me again in 5 years." He laughed and said he respected the decision. The news that we'd turned down a $35 million acquisition offer leaked somehow. Industry publications ran stories about the young CEO who chose growth over payout. My phone exploded with interview requests and investment inquiries. And then, inevitably, Melissa reached out again. This time through a friend of a friend who passed along a message. She wanted to meet for coffee. She had something important to tell me. I almost ignored it, but Victoria said, "Just meet her. Get closure. Tell her directly to stop contacting you." I agreed to meet at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory, in the middle of a workday, so there was a natural time limit. Melissa showed up looking better than she had at my office. She'd gained some weight back, her hair was styled, she seemed more put together. She said, "Thank you for meeting me. I know I don't deserve it." I said, "You have 15 minutes. What did you want to talk about?" She took a breath. She said, "I've been in therapy, working through a lot of things. My therapist suggested I try to make amends with people I've hurt. Not to get anything from them, but to take accountability. So that's what this is. I hurt you terribly. I betrayed you with your own brother. I made selfish choices that destroyed your relationship and your family dynamics. And I'm truly sorry. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I said, "Okay, I accept your apology. Is there anything else?" She looked surprised. She said, "That's it? You accept it?" I said, "Yes, you apologized. It seemed genuine. I accept it. That doesn't mean I want you in my life, or that what you did is excused, but I appreciate you taking accountability." She nodded slowly. Then she said, "Can I ask you something? Are you happy? Really happy?" I said, "Extremely. I have an incredible wife, a successful company, a life I love. I'm happier than I've ever been." She smiled sadly. She said, "Good. You deserve that. I'm glad my leaving led to something better for you." I said, "It did. Not because you left, but because I chose to build something better instead of falling apart. Give yourself some credit for your own recovery, but don't take credit for my success." That was all me. We finished coffee quickly after that. As we stood to leave, she said, "One more thing. I heard you turned down $35 million. Is that true?" I said, "It is." She said, "Why?" "That's life-changing money." I said, "Because I'm not building this company for a payout. I'm building it because I love the work and the challenge. Money is a byproduct, not the goal." She looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. Then she said, "You really have changed." I said, "No, I just finally became who I was supposed to be." I never saw Melissa again after that. I heard through the grapevine that she'd moved to a different city for a fresh start, working in a junior marketing role at a small firm. I genuinely hoped she found some peace and happiness. Not because I'd forgiven her in any deep sense, but because I was so far past our relationship that I could wish her well without it costing me anything. Catalyst Digital continued to grow. By the end of our third year, we hit $15 million in revenue. We expanded internationally, opening an office in London. We won awards for workplace culture and innovation. Victoria and I were featured in business magazines as a power couple reshaping the marketing industry. We bought a house in the suburbs with enough space for the family we were starting to think about. Life was good. Better than good. My relationship with Dominic remained severed. My parents had accepted it, though my mother still held out hope we'd reconcile someday. I didn't have anger toward him anymore, just complete indifference. He'd made his choice. I'd made mine. We were on different paths now, and that was fine. 5 years after Melissa had ended our relationship, I was at an industry conference giving a keynote speech about entrepreneurship and resilience. The audience was about 500 people, mostly marketing professionals and business owners. I talked about starting Catalyst, about the challenges we'd faced, about the importance of surrounding yourself with people who believed in your vision. After the speech, during the Q&A session, someone asked, "What was your lowest moment, and how did you push through it?" I thought about it. Then I said, "My lowest moment was when my girlfriend of 3 years told me she was in love with my brother. They started a relationship that ended my connection with him and fractured my family. I could have let that destroy me. Instead, I channeled that pain into building something meaningful. I learned that the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's building a life so good that you forget you were ever wronged." The audience applauded. After the session, several people came up to thank me for my honesty. One woman said her ex-husband had left her for her best friend, and hearing my story gave her hope that she could rebuild too. I told her she absolutely could. That night, I called Victoria from my hotel room. She said, "How was the speech?" I said, "Good. I talked about Melissa and Dominic." She said, "Really? What made you bring that up?" I said, "Someone asked about my lowest moment and it was honest. Plus, enough time has passed that it doesn't hurt anymore. It's just part of my story now." Victoria said, "I'm proud of you, not just for what you've built, but for who you've become." I said, "I couldn't have done any of it without you." She laughed. She said, "Yes, you could have, but I'm glad you didn't have to." I flew home the next day and walked back into my life. The company, the marriage, the future we were building together. All of it earned through hard work and resilience and refusing to let betrayal define me. Years later, if someone asked me about Melissa or that period of my life, I'd tell them it was the best worst thing that ever happened. The betrayal was real and it hurt, and it could have destroyed me. But it didn't. Instead, it pushed me to become the person I was capable of being. It led me to Victoria, to Catalyst Digital, to a life I genuinely loved. Melissa made a choice that night in the Italian restaurant. She chose my brother over me. I made a choice too. I chose myself, my potential, my future, my refusal to be defined by someone else's failure to see my worth. And in the end, that made all the difference. The company Victoria and I built together eventually did sell, 7 years after we started it, for $120 million. We'd grown it into something substantial, something that changed lives for our employees and clients. But the money was almost beside the point. What mattered was the building of it, the partnership, the proof that choosing yourself and betting on your own potential was never the wrong move. I saw Dominic one more time, years after everything, at my father's funeral. He approached me during the reception after the service. He said, "I'm sorry for your loss. Dad was a good man." I said, "Thank you." He said, "You've done incredibly well. I've followed your success. I'm genuinely proud of you." I said, "I appreciate that. How are you doing?" He told me about his life. He'd remarried, had a kid, was working a stable job in finance. Nothing spectacular, but he seemed content. We talked for maybe 10 minutes, cordial and distant. Before he left, he said, "I know I destroyed our relationship. I think about it often. I just want you to know I'm sorry, and I hope you're happy." I said, "I am happy. I hope you are too." We shook hands and parted ways. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no brotherly embrace, no recovery of what we'd once had. Just two men who'd shared a history, acknowledged the damage, and moved on with separate lives. That felt right somehow. Some things, once broken, don't need to be fixed. They just need to be accepted and left behind. I went home to Victoria that evening and told her about the conversation. She said, "How do you feel?" I said, "At peace. Everything that happened led me here. I wouldn't change any of it because changing it would mean not having this life with you." She kissed me and said, "That's the right answer. We had a good life. A great one, actually. Built on honesty and partnership and the kind of trust that can only exist when two people choose each other every single day." Melissa's choice that night in the restaurant could have broken me. Instead, it freed me to find someone who actually deserved me and to build something that actually mattered. So when people ask if I'm angry about what happened, I tell them the truth. I'm not angry. I'm grateful. Because her rejection led me to the life I was always meant to live, with the person I was always meant to find. And that's not revenge or vindication or karma. That's just the natural consequence of refusing to let someone else's failure define your future. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.